Hello, my name is Paul Fitzgerald. In the background over my shoulder, you can see my travel trailer, our travel trailer. My wife and I, Deborah, own a 2019 Outdoors RV 21 FBS. We made a couple of videos a few years ago when we first bought the trailer used in 2022. And I'll link those in the comments, but they talk about doing some maintenance and repair work on the suspension system. We replaced the shocks, we replaced the springs, we greased up all the bearings and everything like that. And then we took off on a trip and traveled, we actually full-time for about 3.5 years. We traveled about 30,000 miles with the trailer, and so this is kind of an update on longer term wear and tear that you might expect on a travel trailer. We traveled all the way around the country, a couple of loops through Florida, across the south, up through the Rockies, across the Pacific Northwest, down the Pacific Coast, all the way to Cabo, through the Southwest. Had a great time, and then we decided to buy a house. So we bought this house in Florida, and we had previously sold our house in New York, which my previous videos were recorded at. Anyway, I'll stop talking about our travels and tell you a little bit about what our experiences were along the way. So as I was saying, we basically got great reliability out of the trailer itself. The suspension needed the usual maintenance all the way along the way. I'll fill you in a little bit on that right now, and then I'll go on to what I'm going to do today. So as we traveled, I did maintenance on the suspension system, greasing the wet bolts and the bearings. All that work was done either in campgrounds or in boondocking locations, one wheel at a time. So the way I did that work is using these tools right here, a trailer aid and a bottle jack. Get one wheel up off the ground on the trailer aid, and then use the bottle jack to get that wheel completely off the ground so I can get it off and do the necessary lubrication. That's hard to do in a campground, but was able to do it right along. And what I did was I hand packed the bearings when we first got the trailer, and then I think it was twice more in the next 30,000 miles. And in between hand packing, I used the Easy Lube feature to make sure that the bearings were still full of grease. Never had a bearing problem, never had a tire blowout, never had anything too terribly serious. We did have two problems. We had a broken spring hanger and a broken spring, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. But first let me talk about tires. So when we first bought the trailer, it had the stock Goodyear Endurance on it, but they were shot. They had 20,000 miles from the first owner. So I put another set of Goodyear Endurance on them, and I got almost exactly 20,000 miles out of those before they were shot. So then I replaced the tires with Hercules ST 501s, I think they are, ST 901s, and I've had those on the trailer for 20,000 miles, and they've done great. As you can see, I have full tread width, or full tread depth, nearly as much as it was when I was new. These tires have been doing fabulous for us. I expect that they're going to last far more than the 20,000 miles we got out of the Goodyear Endurance. They ride really well. Can't tell anything about a rough ride based on towing. It doesn't feel any rougher or anything like that, and stuff doesn't get jostled around inside the trailer more than with the Goodyears. So I think it's a smooth riding tire that gives good mileage, and is a very robust tire for rough roads, which we do a lot of, back road kind of stuff. And boy, the roads in Mexico are really bad. but some of the interstates we've been on are really bad too. So anyway, that's our story on tires. We're happy with the Goodyear, or with the Hercules ST901s. All right, as far as springs, I replaced the springs when we first got the trailer. They had 20,000 miles on them. They were fairly flattened out. I put a set of springs on that I bought on Amazon, and within a couple thousand miles they flattened out. These are 4,000 pound axles on this trailer. I put 5,000 pound springs, rated springs, and they flattened right out. So I sent them back to Amazon, got a refund, and bought a set of springs from E-Trailer. Those springs are still on the trailer, except this one, which I kept one spring from the original set, and I'm glad I did, because I did break one of the ones that I bought from E-Trailer. Those were rated 2,000 or 4,000 pound axle rating, and 2,000 pounds per spring. And you know, one of them broke, as I said. So I was a little bit disappointed in that, but hasn't been, you know, a huge problem. When the spring broke, we were basically riding on three wheels, and I couldn't tell the difference towing until we got to where we were going, and then the two tires on that side were too close together to be able to get the X-chocks in. So that clued me into something was wrong, and I looked around and saw I had a broken spring. Same kind of thing happened when we broke a spring hanger. That was on the other side. I'll see if I can find the spring hanger that broke and we had welded. It was the left rear spring hanger, and yeah, you can kind of see there that it's a little newish looking, or welded on. Anyway, when we broke that spring hanger, it was the same kind of thing. We were towing on three wheels, couldn't tell the difference from the cab, but when we went to set up that night, we couldn't get the X-chocks in, and then we realized we had a broke spring hanger. So some of the folks on the Facebook page that we are subscribed to for Outdoors RV Trailers have talked about doing some reinforcing plates welded on to reinforce those spring hangers. I would like to do that, and I'm going to look into doing that, but I haven't done it yet. All right, well, today's story is about the brakes and the springs. So having broken one of our four springs already, I think another set of springs is in order. We decided to move to Florida and live here half the year, and spend the warm weather months, which will be too warm in Florida. We'll spend on the road. So we're going to take, like, you know, an 8,000 or 10,000 mile trip this summer, and I want to make sure that everything is in good shape for that. 50,000 miles now on the brakes, and the last time I had them off, I realized, you know, I'm approaching end of life. The drums are worn enough that there's a serious lip on them that makes it hard to get the drum off. So I decided it's time for new brake drums and new brake pads, and so I decided to just go new everything. So here's what I bought. I bought a set of springs that are rated for 4,400 pounds on the axles. These are Dexter brand springs made in China, but they, you know, look like pretty good springs, and they have nylon bushings in them, which I'll put the bronze bushings in instead. And I bought 4 complete brake backing plate assemblies. You'll see later that the magnets on mine are quite seriously worn, and the shoes were getting thin, so I just figured new is good, and I'm going to put these on. And I bought a set of, or bought 4 sets of brake drums, and they're Dexter brand, and oh, by the way, the Dexter brand brake assemblies are made in the USA, and the Dexter brand rotors, it says, or drums rather, it says right on them, made in the USA. So they were kind of pricey, but I figured, well, you know, I don't want to have to make these kind of repairs on the road. So, but they come with a whole new set of bearings and all the hardware you need. So basically it's going to be a complete new brake system and complete new springs. And I also bought a set of lug nuts because the ones that are on the trailer are all rusty and crap. So anyway, this is what I'm going to attempt to do. Hopefully more than attempt to do. And rather than the experience of doing work on the suspension on the road, I have the luxury of having a concrete driveway, a new floor jack that I just bought, and a set of 4 heavy-duty jack stands. So what I'm going to do is jack the trailer up on 4 jack stands, pull all 4 wheels off, and I should be able to do all this work, well, everything's off the ground. So the first step is to crack loose the lug nuts all around while the wheels are on the ground. Just crack them loose, and then jack up the 4 corners. I'm going to jack up like an inch at a time on each corner and put a jack stand under it, and then go around and raise it an inch each time to get the trailer up off the ground in a nice uniform level manner. And then when it's time to pull the wheels off, a convenient tool, of course, is an impact driver. That's not an impact wrench, it's just an impact driver. So I have to manually crack the lugs loose. And by the way, this piece of steel tubing is quite convenient. I'll get my shadow out of the way. Quite convenient because it slides over the handle of my breaker bar. And I'm an old guy, and it makes it a lot easier to break those lugs loose. So step 1, break the lugs loose. Step 2, get the trailer up off the ground nice and level on 4 jack stands. Step 3, use the impact driver to pull the lug nuts off, and then we'll start to get a look at what the condition of the brake system is. Okay, I'll just talk about jacking for a minute. These outdoors RV trailers are have quite a high ground clearance, so you need quite a bit of lift height. I purchased this jack. It's a 2.5 ton rated jack, so this trailer weighs in about 8,500 pounds when it's fully loaded, so it's about a little more than 1 ton per corner. So 2.5 tons was more than enough there in that respect. This jack is a double piston jack, which means that it raises and lowers quickly, which is very convenient. By the way, I don't get paid to talk about any brands or anything like that. This is just the brand I found that I thought looked like a high quality and a reasonable price. So where do I jack? So, another thing about this jack that I bought is it has a fairly high lift of about 18 inches, but that's still not enough. So as you can see, I'm using a wooden block to help get the extra height. And where am I jacking? I'm not jacking on the frame itself. I'm jacking on these steel tubes that are welded to the frame, and then the stabilizers are welded to them. I've done this before. I've never seen any sign that steel tubing is going to crush or anything like that. So it seems like a pretty safe place to jack. And then as far as the jack stand, again, you're going to have a really tall height, so you can't just use a little wimpy short jack stand. You got to get something that's going to get that kind of reach to you. These jack stands are oldie but goodies that are rated for, I think, 10 tons or something like that. But it's the height that is important to me, and they're very stable even at a tall height. So that's where I'm jacking, and that's how I'm jacking. Make sure you have good safe equipment, because putting a 10 or 15,000 pound trailer up on 4 jack stands is no trivial matter, so make sure you got the right equipment. Okay, so I've got it up on 4 jack stands. The front's up about a foot off the ground, and the rear is up about 7 inches, not off the ground, extension of the jack stand, and the rear jack stands are extended about 7 inches. And the driveway's not level, so the trailer's close to level. Everything's supported. The only problem is the rear wheels are off the ground, the front wheels are not off the ground. And the reason for that is that the equalizer is tipped, allowing the front wheels to be down further on the ground, whereas the rear wheels are completely off the ground. So rather than jack the trailer up further, what I'm going to do is get the floor jack underneath the front axle and try to rock that equalizer a little bit so that both wheels will be off the ground. And when I jack on that axle, excuse me, I'm not going to jack on the axle tube itself. I'm going to jack on where the spring is mounted to the axle tube, right there where you see those U-bolts going to the spring. That's the safest place to jack without bending the axle tube. So rather than using the floor jack, I just used my little bottle jack, got underneath that spring with very little effort, lifted it up about an inch, and now both wheels are able to spin freely. I'll go around the other side, do the same thing. Okay, wheels are off, ready to start working on the suspension. I think I'm going to go after the springs first, and in my video from a few years ago, I replaced the shocks with these KYBs, and I think I'm going to take the shocks off first because that allows, you know, the axle to move around more freely to be able to replace the springs. So I'll pull the shocks and then I'll start taking apart the spring assembly. The reason I'm doing the springs first is because I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get the bronze bushings, which I had replaced when we were on the road by a RV shop. I had those done about 10,000 miles ago, and they were actually in pretty good shape after having about 20,000 miles on them. So I think I'm going to probably be able to reuse the bronze bushings with no problem at all. But if I'm wrong about that, and I do have a few spares, not that many, but if I'm wrong about that, I want to get some on order, and Amazon will get them to me in a couple of days, and in the meantime I can work on the brakes. Alright, back soon. Okay, so what I did since the last little segment was I removed the shock from one of the axles. I then removed the spring, and I'll show you talk about the condition of the shocks and springs now. Again, to review, I replaced the shocks 30,000 miles ago, and I last replaced the springs 20,000 miles ago, and no, I'm sorry, the springs also 30,000 miles ago, and I had and I replaced the wet bolts 30,000 miles ago, and then again 10,000 miles ago. So with the shocks, I got 30,000 miles on the shocks. When I jacked up under the axle to compress the shock so I could remove it, the shock was really tight. So what I had to do, really tight meaning good, new, like new. So what I had to do was wire up the shock in the closed position when I was jacking up underneath the axle to compress the shock. And that allowed me to disassemble everything, because otherwise the shock would have extended and made everything a pain in the neck to work on. So at least this one of the 4 shocks, 30,000 miles on, a KYB aftermarket shock. When I replaced the original stock shocks that had 20,000 miles on them, the Monroes, they were completely shot. And now I put the KYBs on, they have 30,000 miles on them, and they still, at least this one, seems to be good as new. Alright, good story on the shocks. As far as the springs go, or as far as the wet bolts go, I replaced the wet bolts when I bought the trailer used. The previous owner said it had about 20,000 miles on it. The wet bolts and bushings were completely shot, so I was glad I did that. I ran them for another 20,000 miles on the replacement set, had them replaced at a RV repair shop, and they gave me the used parts, and they actually look pretty good. So I had been religiously keeping them greased and everything like that. So I concluded from that, well, the first owner estimated 20,000 miles, wet bolts and bushings were really shot. Either he wasn't keeping them greased well, or he didn't estimate, or he underestimated how many miles he had put on the trailer, because they were really shot. Another 20,000 miles that I put on the trailer, and when I had them replaced, and I was religiously keeping them greased, and when I had them replaced, they were pretty good. So based on that, I said, well, now I've got another 10,000 miles on them. When I take them apart, I'm guessing they're going to actually be in good shape and I won't need to replace them. So here's what I found out. This is the wet bolt from the rear where it goes in the spring hanger, the one toward the front of the trailer, which is where the equalizer is over here. So here's the one, the wet bolt from the rear spring hanger. And if I can find the spot, yeah, there's a very flat spot on the wet bolt itself. So that wet bolt was pretty well worn. And if I put it in the bushing, you can see that it's very loose. And the reason it's very loose, if I can get a good view of this, is that the bushing exists on this half. You can see the little edge of it there. On this half, it's completely gone. So we had metal on, or we had steel on steel. The steel wet bolt was directly on the steel spring hanger. The bushing is totally gone. That's after 10,000 miles. 10,000 miles was 2,000 miles towing on extremely rough roads in Baja, followed by another 8,000 miles all over the Southwest, Southern California, Arizona, Southern Utah, on pretty rough roads, you know, back roads, doing a lot of boondocking and stuff like that. So that's 10,000 rough miles, and it completely beat up at least this one bushing. The bushing where the shackle goes, which here on the, it goes to the equalizer, to the shackle, to this bushing. Well, this bushing you can see is it complete all the way around. However, it is cracked in a couple of places. So if I were to take that out of the spring, I'm sure it would just disintegrate into pieces. And the shackle itself doesn't look too bad. I don't see any real bad worn spots on it. And it's fairly loose. I don't have a new one to compare it with, but that's my recollection from when I've done the work in the past, is that when they're new, they're quite a bit tighter than that. So, oops, I should have ordered a shackle and bushing kit in advance. I did not. If I look at the equalizer, and the bushing that's in the equalizer does not seem to be severely worn. If I put the shackle in there, it's really pretty tight. So the equalizer probably does not need to be replaced. However, this is just one of 4 bushings in the 2 equalizers, actually one of 6, because there's one in the top here too. So I'm saying, well, I put those equalizers on there 30,000 miles ago. I'm, you know, not going to be penny wise and pound foolish. I ordered a set of equalizers too. These equalizers right now sell for about $100 a piece on Amazon, and the shackle and bushing kit that does the rest of the suspension is another 110 or something like that. So for 300 plus, I decided I just got to replace everything, and my goal is to get this trailer essentially back to new so we can get on the road again and not have to worry about making repairs when we're traveling. So what I'm going to do now, since I have these parts on order and it's going to take a couple days to get in, is I'm going to put this this axle back into position just temporarily to hold it on in place while I work on the brakes, and I'm going to proceed to working on the brakes while I wait for the suspension parts to come in. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the springs themselves. So what we're looking at here is the old spring and the bottom, and the new spring in the top. The old spring has about 30,000 miles on it, a set of 4 that I bought 3.5 years ago, and they're flattened out a bit, and one of them broke. These were 2,000 pound rated springs, from 2,000 pound per spring, 4,000 pound per axle, 8,000 pounds on the trailer, which is less than my trailer weight minus ton weight. So these springs should have been good. and they ran for 30,000 miles. One broke at about 25,000 miles. Had a spare from the original springs that I put on there. So now they're kind of flattened out, and since one broke, I thought, well, it's time to put a new set of springs on. So I bought 4,400 pound axle rated springs. And as you can see, the 4,000 pound spring, 4,000 pound axle, is a 3-leaf spring, and the 4,400 pound spring is a 4-leaf spring. I measured the thickness of the leaves, and the old spring is 0.39 inches thick. The new spring is 0.35 inches thick. So it's 4 leaves, but they're thinner. But the section from the eye to the second leaf is a little bit shorter on the new spring, which makes sense since there's 4 leaves. So I don't know, even though it's a little bit thinner, I guess, you know, Amazon or Dexter rates these at 4,400 pounds per axle, so I'm hoping that that's all going to be just fine. And you can see that there's a nylon bushing in the new spring. I'm not going to use that, as I already mentioned. I've got a new bronze bushing kit on order. So in terms of the length of the spring, I just wanted to make sure that they're going to fit. And yeah, the old spring is a little bit longer than the new spring, which makes sense that it's flattened out. But I don't expect that I'm going to have any trouble getting those springs in, the new springs in. They're you know, within the range of you know, what I can assemble easily, I'm sure. And then in terms of the arch on the spring, I don't think this is the way they really measure it. They would probably go from the center of the center of the eye of the wet bolt to the arch. I don't know, but I'm just going from the edge of the, you know, spring hanger, or the eye. Anyway, the arch on this spring, the old one, is about 3 1/4 inches. The arch on the new spring is close to 4 inches, maybe 3 3/4. So there's definitely more arch in the new spring than there was the old spring. All makes sense. So from this, I'm going to conclude that even though in principle the old spring should have been stiff enough for this trailer, probably doesn't hurt to put slightly heavier springs on them. Hopefully they'll last longer without giving me a significantly harsher ride or anything like that. And hopefully I'm not going to break one of these. Okay, that's my story on the springs. Okay, so here we are back again. I have one of the brake drums removed, and we'll talk about the condition of the brakes, brake drums, and bearings. Okay, first, in terms of the brakes, brand new brakes, I measured at 0.22 inches in thickness. If you read on the web, new brakes are supposed to be 3/16, which is 0.18. 0.22 is closer to 7/32. Anyway, and then the used brakes that I'm about to replace, a little reluctantly maybe, are at about 1/8 of an inch, about 0.12, 0.13. By the way I'm measuring this is I'm measuring the thickness of the get my camera right here, measuring the thickness of the backing plate, and then zeroing the calipers at that point, and then I'm measuring the total thickness of the metal and the pad. I'm going around and, you know, making measurements at several different places once I have zeroed out the thickness of the metal. So anyway, these brakes, and the replacement thickness is supposed to be 1/16, and so these brakes are a little more than 1/8 inch, 2/16, so they definitely have more life in the pads. At least this one does. But you know, it's more than halfway used, and might get down to the minimum, you know, in the next 10, 20,000 miles, whatever. In terms of the brake drums, there is a ridge right at the edge because of the wear in the drum. This drum is actually pretty good. It's very smooth. There's no big scoring. The surface of the drum that the magnet works against is here, and it's more scored. There's a pretty good ridge out here at the edge, but it's not, you know, devastating. It's really not too bad. You know, the new ones obviously are absolutely smooth, both the braking surface and the drum, the brake shoe surface, and there's obviously no ridge at the edge. So the problem with having a ridge at the edge is it's hard to get the drum off. You know, I was able to get the drum off by prying it with a pry bar, and you know, I didn't have to back off the adjustment to get it off, but it was hard to get it off. So the last time I had these drums off was about, I don't know, 10 or 15,000 miles ago. The last time I hand packed the bearings, and they were hard to get off because of the ridge, and at least some of them were scored. I think as I go around and do the other brakes, I'm going to find that there's at least one that the drum is fairly scored, and the magnet surface might be scored too. So the last time I had them off, I was like, well, these are kind of getting close down to the minimum. The brake shoes are, and the drums are kind of scored, and so I should probably just replace the whole brake system, which is why I bought all these parts. But now looking at least at this one, well, if I was just using this trailer locally for weekend trips or short trips or something, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But you know, we plan to be taking like a 10,000 mile trip this summer, and I wanted to have everything, you know, just be totally great. So I'm a little on the fence about whether I really should replace these, but to send back the parts that I bought and then, you know, just sort of basically delay the inevitable, and then have to do it again in a year or something. Since I got the parts on hand and everything, I'll probably just go ahead and replace them. But based on the condition of this one, it's really not awful. Again, the trailer, these brakes have 50,000 miles on them. So if you've got a trailer with 50,000 miles on it, you probably have brakes that are still quite serviceable, especially if you've been keeping your bearings well lubricated. So going on to the bearings, you know, the drums I bought came with new bearings, but if it didn't come with new bearings, I wouldn't be replacing them. Here's the bearing, the outer bearing that came out of this one, and I wiped the grease off of it, but there's no scoring of any kind, no wear of any kind visible on these bearings. So the bearings are really, at least the outer one is fine. But since the kit came with the bearings, I'll probably be putting new bearings in anyway. So again, you know, I'm going to go ahead and do this, but at least this one's in pretty good shape. Maybe by the time I get through the whole job, I'll find, you know, one or two that is more worn than this, and I'll say, oh, I'm glad I did this. But I'm just going to go to work and start replacing these parts. I just realized that I forgot to mention one thing. You have to pay attention to the right and left side of the trailer. This is the right side of the trailer. The brake assembly I'm going to put on there, on the sticker here, it says it's for the right. But another way to tell is that there's a piece here, which is toward the front of the trailer, and the same piece here. So the assembly is asymmetrical, and this piece here goes toward the front of the trailer. Just a little comment here. I'm soldering the wires for the brakes, and then putting a crimp over the top of that just for electrical insulation. Okay, so I finished up that brake for the details on how to lube the bearings and assemble the brake drum. Look at my older video on the topic, which I'll link in the comments. So now I'm getting ready to do the front brake, but first thing I wanted to do is to compress the shock so that I could put some wire on it and be able to get it off when I'm doing the springs. But the problem is that you see the shackle here is now in the up position, but when I first started to jack it up, it was flipped down to the lower position, and so when I jacked it up, I wasn't getting any compression on the shock, so I needed to get into this up. So what I did was I took my extension bar and I put it in here like this, and I forced. Only I'm showing you on the rear one, but actually I did it on the front one. But what I did is I put pressure on this as I had my wife pump the jack to jack it up, and that way I could get this flipped up to the top, the shackle flipped up to the top, and then when it's in the upper position, it can compress the shock. I hope that was clear. Okay, well now I'm over on the other side, on the left side of the trailer. I'm wiring up the shocks so that I can get them back in when I'm done. So I'm jacking up the axle and compressing the shock and wiring it together using the same trick I showed you before to flip the shackle up so that the shock gets fully compressed. By the way, when I first put these shocks in 3.5 years ago, I used anti-seize compound, which I use on all the bolts that I put together that I expect to take apart again, which is pretty much everything. That anti-seize compound makes it real easy to get a bolt off when it's been on there for a long time. So I was able to take the bolts off these shocks with no problem at all. So now I'm going to release my floor jack, and that'll allow the axle to come down, and that shock comes right out because I already took the bolts off and it's all wired up in shortened configuration so that I can get it back in. Okay, now on this side of the trailer, it's a little different from the other side of the trailer because this is the one where the power from the truck, from the tow vehicle, gets to the brakes. So these white wires here are coming from the chassis of the trailer. They're where the 12 volt DC comes from. And then there's two black wires. There's four black wires. There's one black wire that goes to the brakes, a pair of black wires that goes to the brakes, and a pair of black wires that go into the axle to go over to the other side. So what you want to make sure to do is connect one wire coming from the trailer, one wire going to the brake, and one wire going to the axle to the other side all together, and then the same thing with the other three wires, one coming from the trailer, one going to the brakes, one going to the other side. And as you can see, I'm soldering and then putting a crimp on top to make it electrically insulated. And the crimps, they're probably fine, but I just don't want to risk connection coming loose and losing brake for that stupid reason, so I go ahead and solder them. Another thing is, you can see on these bolts I've got some anti-seize compound. I use anti-seize compound in every bolt I put together. There's different brands of it, but what I'm using is Permatex brand. You can get this at any auto parts store, and a can that size will probably last your lifetime. I've been using this stuff for 50 years, since I was a John Deere mechanic, and I've been amazed at some of the things that I've taken apart years later that came easily apart, whereas if they hadn't had that on it, it would have been a tough job to get it apart. So I highly recommend using that stuff. This grease gun I bought, my old grease gun went bad, and I bought a grease gun, I think it was Advanced Auto, might have been AutoZone, but turned out to be a pretty good grease gun. It has two different, it has a handle that pulls out so that you have a little bit more leverage. It has two different positions. Right there you can see a little button that you can slide, and it says V and P. and so that's volume and pressure. So right now it's like in a high pressure setting, but you can switch it here and you get a longer stroke, so you get more volume. This grease gun's worked out pretty good for me. This is a great little thing I found on Amazon. The way it works is you squeeze this lever, and you see on the end there's things that grab onto the Zerk fitting when you release the lever. It gets a really good grip on the lever, and then you don't have to hold it with one hand and then pump with the other. You can clamp it on, and then you got two hands to work your grease gun and pump the grease. So here's the hub after I filled it through the Zerk fitting, using the Easy Lube. And you can see around the edges of the bearing where the grease kind of came out. Sometimes it comes out at the end of the spindle. I think there's some holes on the end of the spindle. Sometimes it comes out around the bearing, but here it's come out around the bearing. And using this grease gun, it has taken me, this is the third of the 4 hubs that I've done, and it's taken me almost exactly 110 strokes each time to pump, after having hand packed the bearings and put the brand new brake drum on that didn't have any grease in it. It took me 110 strokes to pump it. By the way, I started out with a partial tube of grease. I don't know how much that tube of grease was used, but so far I've done 3 out of the 4 with that. So it probably takes something like a quarter of a tube of grease or something to do each one. I don't think I've shown this before, but this is what it looks like when you take the cap off the end of the hub, and you can see that there's grease all over the bearing, unlike the previous shot where I just showed where I had pumped it full with the Easy Lube. So this just basically shows that grease does get pushed out of the bearings, and it's normal. And if you're hand packing them frequently enough, then that's probably not a problem. But if you're trying to, stretch out the time between hand packing the bearings, using the Easy Lube to push some fresh grease through the system and refill those bearings with grease is probably a good idea, because they are probably pushing a little bit of grease out of them, and keeping them well packed is not a bad idea. We got to the 4th wheel, and now I understand why I had decided that I wanted to replace the brakes the last time I packed the bearings and had the drums off. This wheel is, the brakes are worn more than any other wheel for some reason. This is the left rear wheel. I don't know if that has any significance, but to recap the numbers, new brake shoes I measured at around 0.22 inches. All the 3 brakes that I took off so far, the shoes were worn down to 0.12, and the minimum thickness is a 1/16 of an inch, which is 0.625. Anyway, so I went from new at 0.22 to 0.12 on most of the brakes, where I can go down to 0.62, which means that I had worn about 2/3 of the life of the brakes since this trailer was new. So it's got 50,000 miles on it, so that means 75,000 probably would be a good number for how long you'd get out of a set of brakes. Well, then I get to this one, and this shoe right here is worn down to around 0.1, so it's worn more than any other brake shoe, but it's still within spec. It still would be fine for quite some time. But the real problem is that the drum has a big ridge in it right around the edge, which makes it impossible to get the drum off without releasing the brakes. So to explain that a little bit more, I've got to explain how do the brakes work and how do they, these are self-adjusting brakes, how do they adjust. So how the brakes work is the magnet gets energized and it grabs onto the inside of the brake drum, the surface right here. and when it grabs onto the inside of the brake drum, it pulls toward the rear if you're driving forward, and you can see that arm moving there. And if you look closely right here, you can see that when I move that, the brake expands a little bit. Keyword is a little bit. It only moves a little bit, so that means that it needs to ride along with a small gap between the brake shoe and the inside of the brake drum where it engages with. So to keep that gap small, the brakes have to adjust. And the way they do that, and I'll show you this on the new brake in a minute, the way they do this is there's a little star wheel, that there's a lever in here that engages the star wheel and turns and adjusts the brake shoes. So what happens is, as the brake shoes themselves wear and the inside surface of the brake drum wears, the brakes have to adjust to maintain that narrow gap. And so when they adjust to the point where there's a big ridge here, I wish you could feel this, but it's a good 1/16 of an inch ridge, meaning that this drum is pretty much worn out. It's not terribly scored. It is on the magnet surface in here, it's pretty scored, but the braking surface itself is not terribly scored, but there's this big ridge on it, which means that I could not get the drum off. And the way you have to get the drum off in that situation is you have to rotate the automatic adjusting brake wheel in the opposite direction to loosen it up, and that's hard to do. And the last time I had to do it was in the wild. I was in a campground, laying on my back in dirt. I only had one wheel up off the ground, which means I didn't have much room to work because the other wheel was right there with the jack under it and everything. And then I had to crawl back there and loosen this brake up so that I could get the drum off. And I said to myself, I don't want to have to do that again. I'm going to replace the brakes next time I have a chance. So now I'm going to explain this a little bit in more detail, showing it on the new brake. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so here's the new brake assembly. Again, the magnet that energizes it pulls. I can't do it so easily here. Yeah, I can. Pulls like that and expands the brakes. But the thing I want to show you is this here. This is the adjuster, and basically it's essentially a nut and bolt. This is the nut here. There's female threads in there, and this is a bolt. So when that rotates, it's going to thread out and expand. So the way it rotates is, see this little metal plate right here engages against that wheel. Now if I show you at the right angle, you can see that the wheel has, it's kind of like a gear, but it has stair steps in it, and the flat edge of the stair step is where that metal tab pushes it against it. So to release it, what you have to do is turn it in the opposite direction. In other words, turn it in this direction. And to do that, you have to release that metal tab. I'll try to show you this from a different view. Okay. So here's the metal tab I'm talking about. That has to get released, and then you can rotate this wheel against the direction that it wants to operate. It wants to operate pushing in this direction against those stairs, and so you have to move that away and then rotate it in this direction. Well, that's easy to see when we have this thing on, off the trailer and everything like that, but the way you have to do it when it's on the trailer is you're underneath the trailer and you see these two holes, which are going to have rubber plugs in them. So you take the rubber plugs out, and then what you have to do is use 2 screwdrivers, and you have to get one screwdriver in this hole to move that metal tab out of the way. I'm just working with one hand because I got my other hand on the camera. So you do that to move the tab out of the way, and then the other one, the other screwdriver, you have to get, I don't know if I can see the wheel. You flip it over and look at it from the other direction. Okay, I think I was showing you wrong. So you come in from the side where the green spring is, and you get that tab and you pry it hard to do with one hand when it's not bolted down to something. Okay, so you get that screwdriver against that tab and you pry it loose like this, and then you take your other screwdriver, which I can't do because I've run out of hands, and you rotate that wheel by coming with the other screwdriver through the other hole. And you have to do that, you know, laying on your back, and you have a hard time seeing what you're doing, and having a good flashlight is helpful, but even so, it's a problem. And so what I just did was release that brake so that I could get that other drum off, and that's the last time that drum's going to go on the trailer. And so again, 50,000 miles on the trailer, the brakes are really pretty good, but I want to get back to new and not have to worry about screwing around with trying to get a drum off that has a big ridge in it, and not have to worry about, am I getting down to my last braking. So if you're doing a lot of local travel, you know, probably at least 50, probably 70, 80,000 miles on a set of brakes, which is kind of surprising, but that's what, you know, my experience has been. So that's my story. I'm putting this sucker back on, and I'll be back in a bit. It crimps, but I don't solder them. The crimping tool I'm using is, I think it's a Klein. Yeah, Klein tools. This is one of the better crimping tools I've found. It has, you know, wire strippers on the inside for, you know, several different wire gauges, which is convenient. It has cutters on the end, which, you know, is convenient. And then it has two different places. You can see here, the light's kind of weird because I'm blocking it with my camera. But this position right here is for insulated, and then the position with the little nub on it there is for non-insulated. So I'm using this position that's in the way down in here to there, that position right there, to crimp the insulated, and they crimp really well. That tool gives you a lot of leverage. You can get a nice good crimp. As I'm starting to take apart the suspension, the springs, found a couple of things. One is that this plate here, which is what attaches the springs to the axle, and as you can see, it's kind of bent. Not supposed to look like that. That hole nearest to us here is where the shock mounts. So apparently this got bent when we broke our spring hanger on this particular axle, and this is where the spring hanger was welded, and not sure if you can see that. If you look to the right, the weld is cracked, so that means I'm going to have to get this welded again. And some people have been putting gussets, kind of a triangular piece, on the face of that spring hanger and then weld it up to the frame to give it some extra reinforcement. I think that's probably something I'm going to look into, seeing if I can get done. I'm back again looking at my old CRE 3000 equalizer and a brand new one. I have a brand new wet bolt, and I'm going to compare the new and old using this wet bolt. So I'm going to put the wet bolt about halfway in, and I'm going to move it around, and you can see how much motion I get. If I put it further in, not quite all the way, that's maybe a better way to look at it. So you can see that there's even a brand new wet bolt and a brand new equalizer. There's a little movement in that. Down here, about the same. So that's what new looks like. Here's the old one. Noticeably more slop. That bushing is worn, no question about it, but it's not worn out. If you look closely at it, you can see the bronze all the way around the perimeter. It's not like it's, you know, worn thin on one side or cracked or anything like that. It's still in pretty good shape. And down here, Very little movement. Compare that to the new one, really pretty much about the same. So I would say that that equalizer, which has 30,000 miles on it, it has still some life left in it. Actually, not just some, a lot of life left in it. So I would say that equalizers probably are good for 40, 50,000 miles, no problem at all. The ones that I took off the trailer that were said to have 20,000 miles on them, they were probably about the same as this one. And since I was rebuilding it, everything at that time, I went ahead and put new ones on, and now 30,000 miles later, the new ones are a little bit worn but still have more life in them. But since I've got them and I'm rebuilding everything else, I'm going to put the new ones on. Regarding the springs and the wet bolts that are in the springs and the bushings that are in the springs, on one end you can see that there's still bronze everywhere. I don't know if you can tell that there's a little crack right there. No big deal, but it's not like it's worn real thin or anything. However, on the other end of the spring, and this is where we had broken a bracket, a hanger bracket, a spring hanger. This one is completely shot. It's broken here. If we had a better camera and better light, you'd be able to see that that's down to basically nothing. So that bushing is shot, but that's shot because we had the spring hanger failure. And if nothing else was wrong with the trailer, probably replacing that bushing would be fine and go on with it. But I'm replacing everything, so that's what I'm going to do. But anyway, so as far as and these bushings and wet bolts that are in these springs have about 30,000 miles on them as well. Well, a little less than 30,000, but anyway, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. I replaced them 10,000 miles ago. So they're relatively new bushings, but overall, based on my experience, I would say 20,000 miles on a set of wet bolts and bushings, easy. You could probably push it and get more, and probably twice that, 40 or 50,000 miles on the equalizers. So that's what I'm going to plan on in the future, is sort of 20 or 25,000 mile service on the wet bolts and bushings in terms of replacement, and twice that, 40 or 50,000 miles. So in this section, I'm going to show you how to get the old bushings out of the eyes of the springs and put the new bushings in. But I screwed up on my original recording, so I have to record it over the top, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this. But anyway, all you need to do is find a socket that is of right diameter and drive the old bushings out using the socket, and then using some kind of a soft face hammer, tap the new bushings in. And it's pretty simple, but just try to get that, when you're putting the new bushing in, just try to get it pretty nice and straight. And there's the springs all fitted up with the fresh set of bronze bushings. By the way, you don't have to use a lead hammer. Any kind of a soft face hammer, plastic or whatever, just so you don't bang up the end of the bushing and distort the shape of it. It would make the wet bolt hard to install. Alright, now I'll put this thing back together. Well, what I had done before to flip that shackle up is I had put a tool in between the shackle and then jacked up on the axle to make that flip up. But I just realized I can't do that now because the shock's on, so I don't have enough force to flip that up with a tool. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put a bottle jack under the shackle and push it up, and then I'm going to use the floor jack to lift up the axle, and that should flip it around. Okay, so that worked to flip the shackle around, but I still don't have enough room off the ground to, the axle's not off the ground far enough to get the wheel on. So what I'm going to have to do is move the bottle jack underneath the axle and jack it up and that should do it. The reason I'm having this trouble is because I did not want to get the trailer any further off the ground than necessary, and I just barely had the tires off the ground, and I think the shackles must have been in the flipped up position at that time, and so now I got to just make sure I'm in the same configuration to be able to get the tires back on. Alright, the first side is completely done, and if you'll note, the tires are both in contact with the ground, and it just occurred to me that the reason for that is that these springs have much more of an arch than the old springs, so that's why I had to jack up under the axle and get the shackles flipped around right and everything like that to be able to get the wheels back on. So I'll have to do the same thing on the other side. Alright, on to the other side. So I'm now working on the second side, and I just want to explain the assembly sequence that I used on the other side. Worked well, so I'm using it again here. So what I'm doing is putting in the equalizer first, the CRE 3000, and once that's in, put the wet bolt on the end, and then when you lift up that spring to put the shackle in, it's easy to get that lined up and assembled. And then the axles can be very easily lifted up with the floor jack to bring the seats for the springs that are on the axles up into the springs. There's a little post on the, you can see it on the top, but there's one on the bottom too that engages with the axle to get it lined up. So I'll do that. I'll be back. I remember if I talked about this before, but when putting these wet bolts in, there's a cross-drilled hole on it. I won't take it out and show you, but put the cross-drilled hole at the top, and then when the load is on the spring pushing up against it, it'll leave space for you to be able to get grease in there. And similarly with the shackle, what I'm doing is when the shackles are in the up position, I want them to be, I want the holes to be, see the holes there, I want the holes to be away from the load when they're in the up position, so I'm putting them in like that. Okay, here's another little trick. You can see that the U-bolt is a little bit too wide to go easily into those holes. As a matter of fact, can't go into those holes at all. And so what I did was measured the distance outside to outside of the U-bolt itself, and I measured the distance outside to outside of the holes, and so I need to compress that U-bolt about 1/8 of an inch. So what I did is I put my bottle jack up underneath the U-bolt and to the frame of the trailer, and then I can just pump it. On the other ones I did it about 8 times. I don't know, that's not going to be enough. Now I have to put it back in there. Well, I couldn't do it while I was holding the camera because I had to hold the U-bolt in place so it didn't pop out. Anyway, you have to kind of bend it a little bit, and then when you take it out, test it and see if it fits. And these ones I already did, and it goes in there pretty easy. So that works. Some people would say probably, well, you should just replace the U-bolts, but and I guess maybe that's just some truth to that, but the U-bolts don't really have any load on them because the axle's pushing up against the spring, and the U-bolts are just keeping the axle from falling down. So I don't consider that to be a critical component, and I think just kind of bending them back a little bit like I did so that they can fit in easily is just fine. The shocks, even though I had compressed it when it was on the trailer, was still too long to fit in. So here's my workaround. Stick it on the floor jack under the tongue of the trailer, compress it, and wire it up, then it'll go right in. So now I'm going to release the jack, and there we go. Nice short shock. So she's all put back together again. However, after I got the tires on, I looked at something that gave me a little bit more concern than the last time I saw it. If you look at the spring hanger where it was broken once before and had been welded, now that the weight of the axles and the tires are pulling down on that, it's opened up the crack even more. So, you know, I knew it was going to have to be welded, but it's clearly cracked through. But the point is here, I'm thinking that maybe when I get this thing off the jack stands and there's weight on it again, it might be hard to see that crack when it's closed up. And so maybe a good practice might be to jack up the trailer and support it by the frame if you want to inspect your spring hangers. We'll see what it looks like after I get it off the jack stands. So what I'm going to do, as I said when I jacked it up, is I'm going to go around to each jack stand and jack up and drop it down 1 inch at a time on each corner of the trailer. Go all the way around the trailer continuously until I get it back down on its wheels. Well, I'm all done now, back down on all fours, and looking at this spring hanger, yeah, the extra weight on it closed it up a little bit, but it's still pretty clear that it's cracked. So I guess I would have been able to see that if I was looking at it, even if I hadn't gotten it up on the frame. Well, it's good to have it all done. Here's the aftermath. I got a little cleanup to do. Talk to you later. Well, I'm sitting out on my front porch here in northern Florida on a nice day in January, and there's the trailer all fixed up and ready to go for this summer. Well, still got some more stuff to do to it, including that welding. Anyway, while I was doing all this work here in January in Florida, the rest of the country was dealing with a wicked storm going through. So my heart goes out to everybody that had to deal with that, and I feel real fortunate I was able to spend this time doing this work. So just to summarize what I found out, again, 50,000 miles on the trailer, various mileage intervals on the other components. But start out with the brakes. After 50,000 miles, they had about a third of their life left on them. So a good estimate for brake life, and might be somewhere around 70 or 80,000 miles. We drive on a lot of mountainous roads, so you know, pretty extensive use of the brakes. I have my brake turned up to a pretty high number, might even be at the max, because I like to have that trailer be stopping itself and not pushing the truck around so much, which it doesn't really. The truck's pretty heavy. Anyway, so I replaced the brakes anyway. If I had to do it again, would I? Yeah, because I want the trailer to be back to new, but did I have to? No. One of the brake drums was a little bit worn compared to the others, had a lip on it. I could have taken that to a shop and had that turned off, and it would have been fine. But I'm glad I got that job done anyway. The springs, it's like the fourth set of springs I've had on this trailer. This is a little bit overrated set of springs compared to the others. I'm hoping it's going to last longer. And the arch on the springs is really good. It has a lot of clearance between the tires and the wheel wells. The equalizers definitely did not need to be replaced. I had them, so I put them on anyway. But I would say a good number for equalizers is like 40 or 50,000 miles on those CRV 3000s. The shackles and bushings, I had two bushings that really were severely worn, but that was because in one case on one side of the trailer I had a broken spring hanger, and had caused that bushing to get beat up on that side, and on the other side I had a broken spring, caused that bushing to get beat up. But I could have gotten away with just replacing those two bushings. But the set of shackles and bushings is not that expensive compared to everything else that I put on. So I went ahead and put all new through there. But based on my experience, I would say 20 to 25,000 miles on a set of shackles, wet bolts, and bushings. Seems like the frontmost and rearmost take the most wear. The ones that are in the center where the equalizer and the shackles are don't seem to wear anywhere near as much as the ones way at the front and the rear. So if you want to look and see what your condition of your wet bolts and bushings are, you can probably just jack up, you know, one wheel and take loose one, but you'd have to take the shock off that side too. Once you take the shock off, then you have more, you can manipulate the spring a little bit easier. Anyway, oh, and shocks. So those shocks have 30,000 miles on them, KYBs. I replaced them with the Stockman Rose, which were totally shot after 20,000 miles, but after 30,000 additional miles on the KYBs. The KYBs are just like new. They're great shocks. All right, that's the story. See you on the road sometime.